Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for choosing to spend a little bit of your evening with me or whatever time of day it is, wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Jodi Hammer, and I am an employee with NPCA, the National Peace Corps Association. Specifically, I work in the Global Reentry program, which is the program that's designed to provide career and transitional assistance to the evacuees and RPCVs. So really happy that you've chosen to join me here tonight. I am also an RPCV. I know many of you, I recognize your names, so I'm trying to make my intro a little shorter as well. I certainly don't want to bore you, but I am also an RPCV, having served in Ecuador, which is where my background tapestry is from, and had a wonderful experience there. And I feel very fortunate to have been able to work with Peace Corps, both at the agency level for 12 years and now here with the NPCA since April of this year. So I'm excited to be on board in this role, helping RPCVs and working with all of you as you maneuver what's next for you. So thank you for tuning in. And if you like what you see and you enjoy participating, please feel free to share these with others so that they too can participate. And my video just cut out for some reason. So sometimes that happens and it's not wanting me to be on video, which is okay. But I'll try to get that back up here soon. But sometimes for whatever reason, those technicalities happen. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen anyway, and I'm going to begin talking about what our topic of the day is. I encourage you, if you'd like, you can certainly introduce yourselves. Some of you, I think, have in the chat box already. But we're going to be talking tonight about marketing your Peace Corps service in the job search. And I really want this to be, you know, an informal type of dialogue, really heavy on the Q&A. So when you have questions, certainly enter those into the chat box. And my colleague Olivia is very kindly helping behind the scenes with that. So she'll funnel those questions to me so that I can see them as well. So I'm going to stop several times for questions, but feel free, to put those in the chat box anytime, okay? So great. So marketing your Peace Corps service in your job search it's really valuable, right? It's one of your Peace Corps service is probably, if it's like me and the thousands of volunteers that I've worked with over the years, it's one of the most valuable and meaningful and life-changing experiences of your life, right? And yet it's really hard to convey that when you get back and especially in the professional setting, like trying to get a job, which is what we're going to be focusing on mostly. But before that, I do want to address very quickly as well, the whole challenge of translating your Peace Corps service even to friends, right? And friends, colleagues, that type of thing. It's really hard to sometimes describe what you did, right? And oftentimes, friends will say, "Oh yeah, I tell me all about it." Right? How was Peace Corps? Tell me all about it. Wow, what a question, right? That's a huge question. There's going to be a huge, long answer typically, right? It was very valuable, all of that. But how many of you have already experienced that, like you start telling your story and boom, the attention span, is done. The glazed eye look, which I have later on in the slides. Have any of you experienced that? If so, just put yes in the chat box here. And yeah, I'm just curious as to how many have experienced that. Yeah. Anyone? Olivia, are there some folks that are saying yes?
Yeah, there's a bunch of folks saying yes.
Yeah. And that's to be expected. I mean, it's really hard to talk about it, and it's hard on you, because when that happens, you feel shut down, right? It's like, wow, they don't even want to hear about my service. But the problem is they just can't understand it because it's so different and so unique. And, you come back, you're excited, or, if you were evacuated, obviously disappointed, and, all of that, but just trying to translate, that's really hard. You might have had a little less experience with that only because you've been isolated because of, COVID-19. You haven't been able to get out and get, together with friends, and maybe on the phone, you certainly can't see that glazed eye look, but you can feel it when there's suddenly the silence, right? Or even on Zoom, those kind of things. So that can be challenging. And so the advice that I give for that is to break it into small pieces, very, small, digestible, as I call it, units, where you maybe give that, maybe your overview of, well, I was assigned to a small village in da, 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 where my primary assignment was to teach whatever it was. And then kind of pause, right? And let them, that way you don't keep talking and then suddenly they just tune out. You give them the chance to ask a question. Oh, well, what does that mean when you say primary project? What did you do other work? Oh, what was that? So it makes it more of a conversation than just a monologue. It's more of a dialogue than a monologue if you do that. So that can really help. And I hope that's helpful for you as things open up and you are able to reconnect, with friends and family members. But the same is true, of course, in networking, right? Where you're going to really kind of fine tune it more to meet your goals as well. And we're going to talk a lot more about the professional. But another word of advice for you is, connecting with your cohort, both your country of service, but your greater Peace Corps family as well, because they're the people who understand what it's like. They're the ones that have the patience and they know what it's like to come back and just be excited about what you did and not really be able to explain it and be at a loss for words and, all of those things that happen, right? Be overwhelmed when you go into the supermarket by the number of, kinds of, full fat, non-fat, regular, fat level, all those things that just are very overwhelming. So I encourage you to tap into the community as well. But tonight, we're really talking more about the communicating it in the professional setting. So communicating it both, with networking, which is part of the job search, right? How do you market your Peace Corps service in your applications, right? In your resumes, in your cover letters, in your interviews, all of those things. How do you suss this incredible experience that's been so huge and filled with, I'm sure, your share of strife and, hopefully, the reward aspect as well, right? But how do you package that? And then, of course, I do honor and acknowledge, and I hope there will be some questions later on about this as well, and I'm happy to help you more, but acknowledging that each individual's service is different. And, while some may have had that, oh, perfect service, if you will, and oh, they loved it, everything was great, and they accomplished this, that, and the other, and, you end up comparing yourself to the other volunteers that, maybe have these, whatever services. And I just caution you to not do that, to focus more on yours and your own service and the challenges oftentimes, as I'm going to talk about a little bit later, especially in like interviewing, the challenges that you had. Let's say you had a really tough service. Maybe you got there and it was tough and then you were evacuated to boot, shortly after you even got there. That's really hard, right? But sometimes it's those stories and those experiences that can really help you a great deal when you're, in your job search, because they will ask questions like that. So we'll talk about that as well. But just honoring and acknowledging that people have different experiences and that not everyone has had that perfect experience. You may have come out of it with more negative experiences than positive, but just know that you're going to be able to tap in to those experiences and, of course, be positive, not come across as the negative Nilly, negative, but how you, in spite of that, you learned the value of, patience and, fortitude, resilience, those kinds of things, so that you can, come across really positively when you're marketing yourself. Okay, great. So let's talk in terms of the value of your Peace Corps service. I just want to remind everyone, you were not just a volunteer. And in fact, when you market yourself and your experience with Peace Corps, I would not market it as much about the volunteer component unless you're going with something, maybe you're going for a job where it's national service, where that in and of itself is a really great thing to have, that's fine, do it then. But I would just say, and it's not that you're covering up that it's a volunteer experience, but a lot of times when people think of volunteer experiences, they think of part-time, limited hours. It may be, great work, but it's limited, right? Whereas you were the exact opposite, right? You were in your site 24/7. Your schedule didn't necessarily go with the traditional, 40 hours a week, and you probably worked, many weekends, those kinds of things. So you want to make sure that they understand, what it was. So I typically recommend to people that you market it as a under your professional experience and as a professional job, because the fact that it wasn't paid does not make it any less professional. So just remember that volunteer does not mean that it's not a professional experience or unpaid. And really, truth be told, you did get a stipend. Granted, it wasn't very much, but it was that stipend that allowed you to live in country and travel, so your expenses were covered, and there was so you did get something for it as well, right? But be proud of your volunteer service, clearly, right? That's great, and it was wonderful, but really, really talk about it as that professional experience, what your role was and what you did, and the things that you were, that you focused on, what you were able to accomplish, and all of those kinds of things. Okay. I also want to say quickly that for folks that are looking to work in federal government, your time in country can actually serve and count toward time in service in the federal service. So it can accrue for things like vacation, your leave. And it can help you quite a bit, because I believe it's after, I'm not an HR professional from the federal sector, but I believe it's after 3 years of federal service. In the beginning, you get, I think it's 4 hours of leave every, what is it, 2 weeks or whatever. And then after 3 years of service, that goes up, right? To, I think then it's 5 or 6, whatever. It goes up, right? I think it's just 6. And then it's that 6 until you're at 15 years. So there's a big, and then it goes up to 8 years, 8 hours, sorry, per year. But what's important about that is if you did your Peace Corps service, and let's say you did the traditional 2 years of service, and you're in your government job, you would then have 2 years after 1 year of employment in that federal sector, in that organization, your vacation accrual would go up, which is awesome, right? What you do need to do in order for that to happen is to what's called make a service credit payment. You're basically buying back your service, if you will. You're basically, as I understand it, you're paying taxes on that income, which, as we know, is not very much because you don't earn very much, right? But you want to make that service credit payment sooner rather than later. Like if you are out for 15 years and decide to go into the federal government, it's going to cost you more at that time. But I, for example, bought back my 3 years because I stayed an extra 3rd year in Ecuador, and I bought back my service, and it ended up costing me like $200 or $300, which wasn't a lot in the long, haul. I mean, it really, it was great because my vacation accrual went up much, faster, and all of that. So, and it can be used toward even your like retirement if you stay in there. So just a plug for that's one of the values of your Peace Corps service as well. And you want to, when you get a federal job, just ask the HR, tell them that you want to make a service credit payment for your Peace Corps service, and they should be able to help you out. Okay. And then skills development. I mean, you gain so many skills, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, when you're in Peace Corps. And so it really increases your marketability for jobs back here. And so we're going to talk more about that as well. So let's go ahead. And I want you to just, in the chat box, if you can just write, what skill or skills did you gain in your Peace Corps service? What are some of the skills you really gained that you're proud of? And everyone, even if you were not there very long, you certainly gained certain skills and such too. So let's see what's coming in. I'm going to open up my chat box too. Olivia, are there certain things that are coming in more? You're monitoring the chat box more here. Let me just see.
I think people are still sending those in. So we got adaptability
Sure.
so far. Yeah.
Great.
Collaborative skills.
Yeah. Oh, those are great.
Mhm.
Adaptability is a huge one, right? And it's one that, I mean, almost every Peace Corps service, I think you have to be adaptable, right? In your village, in your role, all of those things change on a dime. I mean, look what happened with, the COVID-19, you had to evacuate. So that was also that resiliency, right? Having to just pack up it with, moments notice and leave. That's really tough as well. And yet, folks did it and you made it and you're here on this end now and you're, moving forward or looking to go back. So any other ones coming in?
Yeah, so we have collaborative skills, facilitation skills, communication, cross-cultural communication and relations, patience, grant writing, resourcefulness, community integration, intercultural communication, advocacy skills, consensus building is a lot. Flexibility, patience, communications, public speaking, etc.
Wow. Okay. You all got a lot of those skills. Now, anyone know what are many of those skills that are spotlighted there are a specific kind of skill that I've actually mentioned in many of my, in many of the webinars and such, but they're the kinds of skills that can be used in a lot of different roles, a lot of different, jobs. Anyone know what the correct title is for those kinds of skills that are oftentimes they're called soft skills, but another word for that? Anyone? I'm looking in here to see. There's so many great ones, and they're definitely exactly what I'm talking about. Soft skills, yep, is one word for it, but they also refer to it oftentimes as transferable skills, right? These are the kinds of skills that you develop that are coveted by most employers, right? These kinds of things that you came out with on our little quick survey here, right? Resilience, community organizing, consensus building, problem solving, right? um, leadership, patience, all of those kinds of things, cross-cultural skills, right? Communication skills, intercultural skills is a big word nowadays, right? So you obviously got a lot of those skills. So there's really great transferable skills that you undoubtedly um, developed while you were in Peace Corps. And as I said, regardless of how long you were there, even if you were only there, maybe shortly after, maybe within the first, 3 to 6 months after you finished your pre-service training, you were evacuated. Even in that pre-service training, there's a huge element of transferable skills that you're developing, right? And many times, I think most times these days, the trainings are including like community, what do you call it? Like a project in a community. They're like mini projects, or go do a charla, a talk. You're designing things and doing community initiatives, right? So that you're getting more comfort and with your role, right? So those kinds of skills, whatever you did in pre-service training, you can absolutely refer to and market and talk about that, right? So just remember that you definitely got a lot of skills and you can market those. Okay, great. So the transferable skills that we've just been talking about, right? And we have several up here that are listed as well. There's additional ones. What I recommend is that you work in those transferable skills into all aspects, right, of your application. So, everything from resume, cover letter, interviewing, but even networking. And we're going to start talking a little bit about, networking as well. You really, if you can really translate your experience by focusing on the transferable skills that you gained and the knowledge that you have, if it's technical knowledge needed and that kind of thing as well, it can really help you to stand apart and help you to be more desirable, right, to the employer. And that's what you want to be, right? It's all about standing out and making yourself stand out, right? So we're going to talk about each of these aspects. The challenge is really, communicating your Peace Corps experience and what you did, in the job search, right, throughout the entire job search. So let's talk for a moment on networking, and then I'll stop for questions. If people have questions about networking and how to market your Peace Corps skills, drop them in the chat box now. I'm happy to answer some of those before we move on to the next category. And there'll be time as well at the end. So whenever you're comfortable, you can certainly drop those questions in. With regard to networking, right? We talk about a lot of times a 20 to 30 second pitch, right? About your Peace Corps service. And it's as related. Now it depends on who the audience is, right? When you're networking, you may be, truth be told, you may be looking at quite a few different types of roles. So depending on who you're talking with or networking with, you're going to want to spin it a little different, right? But I would encourage you to, as a homework, if you will, from this, think a little bit about, a little more about your experience and how would you define your Peace Corps experience in 20 to 30 seconds, and set your clock and practice and see how far you get or don't get, because oftentimes, I think in the beginning especially, you hardly, you hardly have started and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm out of time already, what do you mean? So but it allows you to hear yourself as well, and what you're saying and what needs to be said, that kind of thing. So in here, and this is not necessarily, it's not necessarily like a full-blown example, but it's more like you might start, maybe you're, it could be you're talking to, an employer that, is somebody you're, interested in, and you're introducing yourself, and you might start with, oh, I have a background in whatever field and X years of professional experience in the area. Most recently returned from Peace Corps, where I was working right? Just a few. I mean, you can't go into the big detail. You're talking 20 to 30 seconds. I mean, it's not going to like cut you off at that time, but the attention span of people is what you're trying to get. You want to more make it digestible and more of a conversation, so that you put that out, and then hopefully they ask you a question. Oh, wow, maybe you mentioned in that you were evacuated, which again, that's not bad to mention. I mean, people really felt badly about that, and they were just surprised. So when they hear that, it's like, oh, wow, you were evacuated. How was that? Or what happened? And then you can talk a little bit about, well, I had 4 hours notice to pack up my life and get to the airport, which closed down the day after we left, or whatever it is. And it draws them in, right? So, but I think the important thing when you're networking and you're maybe introducing yourself to different people is you want to include the kind of role or roles you're looking to go toward, right? So in whatever the end is of your 20 to 30 second kind of pitch, you might want to say, and at this point, I'm looking to, translate those skills I've gained in XYZ or project management and whatever skills. Again, you're aiming at whatever you're going for, talking about the relevant types of skills and experiences that are needed for these kinds of jobs with an organization here dedicated to blah, blah, blah. So, and you can get that information. Like, you may not know what exact skills they're looking for right away. So that's where you do some of your own research, right? Even before you participate in, whether it's online or eventually, in-person networking types of activities, doing some research and, and talking to people and getting a little more information on what is it like, what are the biggest skills that are needed for that type of a role, and then, kind of crafting your own story around that so that you can come across in the right way. I hope that makes sense. Does anyone have a question on, networking right now that we can address before we move forward? I don't see any in here yet, but I'll give you a moment to write any in, should you have some, before we go on to the next area, and I'm happy to answer those.
Yes, we have one question.
Great.
So Chillo asks, I was med evac 5 days before the global evacuation. How do I market that?
Sure. 5 days before the global evacuation. Wow. Yeah, that's so close that it really is in that same kind of era. I mean, normally when I talk to people who have had a medical evacuation, you certainly can. I don't recommend going into details, and you certainly don't need to. I mean, if you are comfortable with it and you want to, that's your decision. But generally, I would recommend, I was evacuated due, medical, due to a medical condition, where they weren't able to, treat it in site, on site or whatever. Just you can either do that, or in your case, if you were, I mean, it was so, I'm just trying to think, the way that you would word it, I mean, I would never recommend that anyone lie, right? You want to say the truth, but it's what do you need to really say, right? So, I enjoyed, 3 months, 5 months, whatever it was in country, until I was evacuated. And then, my entire cohort was evacuated for COVID-19. Like, you said you're evacuated, and then your cohort, the entire cohort, so there wasn't an ability to go back, or there, immediately. Something like that would, I think, take attention off of it if you don't want to talk about, yeah, that's probably what I would say. And feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to you more on that if you need, okay? Okay, any other questions right now about networking or anything we've talked about so far? Just waiting here a moment. I don't see anything else coming in, so I'm going to go ahead. All right. So let's talk about LinkedIn very briefly, marketing your Peace Corps service while networking and using LinkedIn. As we know, LinkedIn is really the most common and probably powerful form of online networking, right? So you can definitely include your Peace Corps in your profile. With LinkedIn, you have a little more flexibility with how you state things. You can use complete sentences, for example. I typically advise in resumes using bullets. So that's a fragment sentence, right? Starting with the ed action verb, and just, keeping it crisp. But in LinkedIn, you can definitely use the more complete sentences, and you could address your Peace Corps service in your profile, which is the part that's right up front, right? You might put your Peace Corps title. Now, it may or may not be your official job title that you put in your LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn is not, if you don't put anything, what it's going to do is put your most recent job title as your title. So but you have the opportunity to adapt that. So oftentimes Peace Corps volunteers, your official title, or what you were doing, what people might have said was your, title, isn't what you want to be doing. And a classic example, I'm thinking of many programs in Peace Corps are education. I mean, most are education in some way or another, but education as in teaching in the classroom. And so some people don't necessarily want to put teacher, right, in their profile, if they're looking to maybe now go into international development and work in project management and other things like that. So you may put in your title, you may have, you may have the word educator. You may also have project developer, or, project manager, that kind of thing, because you were a project manager, right? It doesn't have to be a formal title that you had in your job, right? For LinkedIn. So I would encourage you to include the kinds of maybe multiple titles, especially if you're looking at a couple different kinds of areas, right? So that would be very helpful. And then spotlighting you definitely want to spotlight your transferable skills, right? That are relevant to where you want to go, right? So you're crafting your LinkedIn, your image, if you will, and your profile, that's what it is your image, right? In the direction of where you want to go and what kinds of jobs you're looking at. Now, you don't have, 15, profiles because you have 15 jobs you're looking at, but you can usually craft and incorporate multiple titles to be able to, be applicable and correct for, and helpful for people in reviewing your LinkedIn to get more of a sense of who you are and what you're doing. So there's definitely, like I said, more flexibility there, which is great. That's one of the real advantages. Let's talk a little bit. If there are there any questions at this point about LinkedIn? If so, dump them in the chat box. I'm happy to address them. And let's see if there's any. I have it opened here too. Happy to address any questions on LinkedIn before we move on and talk a little bit more on resumes. One of my favorite subjects. All right. I'll go ahead and talk about resumes, and then we can always come back. Olivia, just let me know if there's maybe a question that comes up about LinkedIn. We can always answer that after I start this. So in terms of marketing your Peace Corps service within, your resume, you want to really spotlight this as a professional experience, right? As I said, it's a job, and you can include here, just as I was saying in LinkedIn, alternative job titles or roles. So how many of you, my question to you would be, how many of you had more than one role in your Peace Corps service? And actually, let me rephrase that. How many of you had one role, one position, nothing else? And if you did, you could certainly drop that in the chat box. But I would predict that the vast majority of you had at least a few different roles, right? You had your official Peace Corps role, and then you had the realistic insight role of what were they really looking for, right? Perhaps. You also had your community, how you gave back to the community maybe, or your secondary project roles, right? Maybe you wrote a grant to create a library in a village and such. So you would certainly want to spotlight, like, grant writing skills are great. And guess what? Even if you were evacuated before your grant was received, it does not take away from the fact that you did that, right? So, wrote, independently authored $5,000 grant to provide blah, 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 in, a community library in village of whatever. And how many people did you reach through it? That kind of thing. You see, but you still did the writing. You wouldn't say implemented, like you wouldn't say wrote, received, and implemented a whatever amount, grant, because you didn't get it or implement it. But even if you were turned down, it doesn't take away from the experience of you wrote the grant. You have grant writing experience. So remember those kinds of things when you're going for jobs. A lot of times when I, have talked to people and they're looking at jobs and they say, oh, I don't have any experience in this. And, when I question them, I'm like, okay, well, tell me about your Peace Corps service. When you did you do something like that? Oh, well, yeah, I did. Oh, sure. Would that count? Absolutely. So you want to spotlight those applicable skills in your, in your resume. So it's super helpful to do that, because it frames you as a very qualified candidate, right? And you want to be among those that are seen as, wow, this is somebody we need to talk to. This is, we need to talk to this person. Now, Peace Corps itself also does set you apart, right? It's a unique experience. Now, I know there's 220,000 of us total since, 1961, whatever. But in many areas, it's not as common, right, to have RPCVs. You don't have as many. Sometimes people here, admittedly, sometimes people here in DC will say, I'm a Peace Corps volunteer. I'm an RPCV, but everyone, I run into an RPCV on every block. There's, they're all over. Well, it is true. There are a lot of RPCVs here in the DC area, right? But it's still, what your challenge is then is to set yourself apart from other RPCVs by doing these kinds of things, right? By making sure that you're incorporating the kinds of skills and transferable skills and the kinds of experiences you've had that make you uniquely qualified for this role, right? And I can tell you, a lot of employers still are like, wow, Peace Corps, how is that? Or what do they say? Oh, I always wanted to do that, right? That's because so many people will reply with that. They thought about doing it at one time. So you just really be proud of your Peace Corps. I think service, more often than not, it's going to help you. Yeah, I mean, you may have a very few people who, had a negative experience maybe with a specific, one particular Peace Corps volunteer who, lived in an area and they were in that area and they weren't impressed with them. But by and large, they understand too that there's always, some that might not shine as much. But by and large, Peace Corps is regarded very, very favorably. Are there any questions coming in on networking or resume? Let's see. I see Austin thinking about federal resumes. How different should the Peace Corps portion of the resume be from our DOS reports? Good question, Austin. With your federal applications, usually you have the option to upload additional items, or at least, one. If you're going for a NCE position for federal, you have to actually, your DOS is your proof of your volunteer service, right? Of your Peace Corps service and your NCE. So you're going to, submit that. I would not recommend having your resume be a duplicate of like your entire, DOS. You don't have room for that. I think you would probably take the most applicable things, but you can refer to that document, your DOS, as kind of like you would a master resume, where you can look at like what you all have there and then pick and choose the things that are most applicable, most related to this job that maybe you're looking at or this experience you're looking to go with. So I hope that makes sense. So, and let's see, Olivia, great. If you weren't able to officially quantify the impact of a project with numbers, how else can you include numbers in your resume? Good, great question. And I'm a huge believer in numbers in your resume, just because they pop and they make it more believable, right? So even if it's, maybe you collaborated with team of 5 teachers, put the number. To develop and implement national curriculum designed to da 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 da. Maybe you don't have the outcomes of what percentage the increase was or whatever, right? But you can put the number of people you worked with, the number of people it was for. So the number of people you taught, for example, right? The number of, people in your, youth group that you ran as a side project, as your, secondary project, things like that, and what kinds of things you did. So absolutely. You may not always, the truth of the matter is you may not always get the total, impact. But whatever it is. And sometimes people are like, well, what if it's not a huge impact? Well, I mean, I think numbers in general, speak positively, any progress is progress. But that's totally up to you, but you can certainly work in some numbers. And by the way, speaking of numbers with resumes, you're going to hear different things from different people. So I'm not one to say, oh, mine is the one way to do things. But what I will say is there's definitely controversy on this, whether or not to do it. I am definitely of the school of belief, although I learned growing up, under 10, spell it out. That was just a huge, hard rule. So 8 would be spelled out if you're writing, not the number. Well, on a resume, you're breaking the standard rules anyway, right? It's not even complete sentences, right? So I don't worry so much about that. I worry about catching the eye of the person who's the reader. So I instead will say put 8, the number 8, instead of the other, unless you are going for maybe a communications position where you want to show them that you know all of the MLA or whatever standards they're using. So other than that, though, I think the numbers are going to pop a lot more. Then you can always have the number over 10, right? But yeah, so you can even, I would make a case even for the other. So great. All right, so any other questions, please keep putting them in there. Thank you so much, and we'll keep going here and see if we can. I'm going to try my video again and see if it'll let me have it. Okay, now it's showing me, so hopefully that's going to stay. And so within your resume, as I said, including the numbers are great. Highlight your additional roles. So like if you were a volunteer leader, maybe you stayed for a 3rd year in a different role. I would probably on your resume, instead of having that all together clumped under one job title or 2 job titles with a slash in between it and the comprehensive dates, I would break that out. So you'd have your most recent first, which would be your, maybe volunteer leader, national volunteer leader, whatever, rural health program, whatever your title was. And then you could put even in your bullet, promoted or entrusted to lead or promoted to 3rd year extension position based on proven performance and dedication, responsible, whatever, what you did, trained incoming volunteers, whatever else it was. So have that as one listing. And then the next title, in that case, if you have multiple titles under one organization, you may want to have your organization and your location of the organization on one line, and then your job title and then the dates on the second line, because that way you don't have to rewrite Peace Corps, the organization, before you have your second title. So I hope that makes sense. That can make it easier. Let's see here. Yes, so spotlight, it could, what you're putting on your resume does not have to, you don't have to do it chronologically in terms of your different experiences, but within your one experience of Peace Corps, You do not have to have your bullet entries be in the order of what they happened, of when they happened, right, to you. You could certainly swap that up and have the most applicable ones highlighted first, right? Oftentimes your first bullet is a little more of kind of your overall role. You might say something about that. And then you might have your bullets under, your additional bullets could be in any order. So it doesn't have to be just that reverse chronological all in within the job that you're talking about. Which helps you because it helps you to spotlight things that are more important. And of course, you're going to, in your resume, you're going to look at those keywords, right? And you're going to look at the job, in the job announcement. You can highlight the keywords, or like I said in another webinar on a different subject, dump them into a word cloud. And there's lots of free word clouds. Just do a Google search, free word cloud. There used to be one, Wordle, Wordle.com. Olivia, if you can just dump that in the chat box, that would be great. It's Wordle.com. I just went to it the other day, and it did, there's kind of there's a pop-up that comes up where it says something, and then you go beyond it. Eventually I got to it, but it took a couple extra clicks. So there's some other ones that are free too, and really easy. And all you do, you just dump, if you have the job announcement, you just dump the link into, or whatever copied text, whatever, however you want to do it, you dump it into the little place where you put it, you push go or enter, whatever, and it creates a word cloud. And if you're not familiar with word clouds, I bet you've seen them. They're where you have lots of different words that are all jumbled together. And some of them are really big in size. Some of them are really small in size. The bigger the word, the more central that word is, or more important that word is, or more frequently it's included. So it's a keyword. So the biggest words are the keywords, and you want to make sure that you get those keywords into your application so that you can then really, when you spend a little more time doing that, you can make your application stronger, and you can, in essence, oftentimes reduce I know that the tendency is, especially when you're feeling like, I've got to get a job now, I'm desperate, I need to get this, you just like, poof, blanket, just all kinds of applications, and you just put a ton of them out, thinking one's going to come through, right? But the problem with that approach is that you're not tailoring it at all, and then what happens is you don't sift to the top as one of those, really good candidates who get called then for the interview. So, I mean, it may work out. Sometimes it does. I've heard of people who've gotten one that way, but you might think about thinking smarter and applying smarter, where you might be applying for less jobs, but spending more effort on those applications to make yourself really set apart, stand out, and hopefully get that interview for a job. Okay. So let's see, are there any questions that have come in?
Yes, we have one question about possibly submitting resumes for professional review.
Yep, there's a lot of opportunities actually for this, including the mentoring program, which I know we've been talking about, and it's going to be rolled out. We got literally 350 requests from RPCVs, right, and EPCVs, and about 300 people willing to serve as mentors, right? We've got really great RPCVs all over the states that have a lot of experience, and we tried to, my colleague Dan did the matching and everything for it, and really trying to match as best as possible, people together. And he's at the point where we're going to be, I think he said within this next week, notifying the RPCV that they can contact then, the person. So going from there, so that's one option. Other options are your local group, your local affiliate groups. So, for example, the RPCVs of Washington, RPCVW group, they do actually a formalized mentor program themselves, and they also do some resume review things. But I will say too, on the COVID-19 support group and some of the other ones, people have been just asking, hey, I'd love somebody with experience in XYZ sector to take a look at my resume for this kind of a job. People have been really good about stepping up and doing that. So I would encourage you to reach out there. Yeah, so, and I mean, I am happy to take a look at resumes. I have quite limited availability At present, unfortunately, because I am doing, 3 to 4 webinars per week, and I'm working part-time. So, but I'm hoping that we'll be able to expand it hopefully in the near future. But I'll definitely, I'd be happy to. So if you want to send it to me, I'll be honest, if I have a chance to take a look at it. If I can't give you more than a real brief, appraisal, or kind of at, like eagle eye glance, from the large feedback and such, I can certainly do that. I mean, I'm happy to do that. I used to do that a lot in my position at Peace Corps headquarters. So if you're struggling and, not able to find somebody who's able to give you some, good assistance, I'm also going to send folks eventually. It may take a couple days because we have so many webinars this week, but I'm going to send in the follow-up email a link to like a sample resume, and we're going to, do some other things. I think we're going to do a session at some point early July, I think it'll be. We're going to do we hope to do a resume. I want to do like a live resume review, reviewing a few people's resumes or parts of their resumes, so that people who obviously are open to having theirs, shared, and then share the screen and kind of give you in the moment, thoughts, and that way you can hear my thoughts on, resume writing and what works and what doesn't, and apply that to your own, which is another way to maybe, help more than, one person as well. So, okay. So that was, I think, who was that from? That was, yeah, and sending it in. I'll take a look if, yeah, Surintra, is that right? I hope I pronounced that right. Okay, great. And then let's see, I do see another question here. How can I apply for the mentorship program? Okay, there is a link in, you should be on, I hope everyone's on the newsletter, the Global Reentry newsletter. I don't have that link right with me right now, but it's in, if you look at the Global Reentry, like if you do a search in your inbox and put mentee or mentorship program, you'll get mentor program, mentor match. You will get I'm sure the email that has the article on that, but just drop me a line if you need as well. You can reach me at Jodi at peacecorpsconnect.org or careers at peacecorpsconnect.org is what we oftentimes share. So yeah, and I'll be happy to get that for you. Okay. Great. So let's, I don't see any other questions right now. So let's go on and talk a little bit about the cover letter. So, the cover letter, this, spotlighting your NCE in the intro paragraph, if you're going for a federal job, like I said earlier. In that very first paragraph where you say, something about, the job that you're applying for, you're, thrilled to be applying for the XYZ position and confident your whatever skills will be well utilized. I do have non-competitive eligibility for federal hire, for the federal positions, right? And then you want to keep your resume, your cover letter brief. So you don't, I say maximum 1 page, but really it should be more like 3/4 of a page. You really don't want to have it because they don't get read if they're long and the long paragraphs. So keep your paragraphs short. It's not supposed to be just a regurgitation of your resume. It's supposed to have additional information, right? And where you can kind of share that story, there you might share the evacuation, after being evacuated from I'm looking for opportunities to, blah, 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 my experience, all of that. So yeah, so really keep it brief. You can't tell your whole story. You just can't. But the most relevant things that are going to help you to stand out, right? And include what you did, right? Like I said, even if you didn't finish something, you were evacuated before you got to finish whatever project or grant, include what you did do, right? People understand, especially with, the COVID-19, people completely understand, and they understand longer gaps in unemployment, right? A lot of people lost their jobs with or due to COVID-19. So you're not going to have employers say, oh, what were you doing from March 2020 to August 2020 or whatever it is, whatever your gap ends up being, right? So don't worry too much about that. Okay, but cover letters, the other thing that I always say about cover letters is people say, well, our cover letter's optional. Do you have to do a cover letter? You'll get different obviously comments and such. I am a huge fan of a cover letter, only because I think it helps you to be able to make your case more. It shows you can write, you're doing full sentences, right? And that makes you stand out, because not everyone does a cover letter. In fact, a lot of people don't do a cover letter. And that's not a problem for some people, but for other people like me, I'm very much of a cover letter fan. And if you don't have a cover letter, my first thought is, you know, are they really committed to this job if they didn't do a cover letter? I mean, so if time permits, do one, right? If you're in a deadline and it's going to be a matter of, doing a sloppy one or something that's going to actually end up hurting you more than it helps you, just do the resume then, right? For federal positions, sometimes, people don't include them. So sometimes people don't, they're not required, right? Again, I really preferred, even in a federal, the cover letter, but they're very rarely required. Okay. So do we have any, I'm going to go on to interviewing unless there are some questions from folks. I see there's 6 new comments. Olivia, is there anything in the chat box that's a question about either LinkedIn or cover letters, resumes so far?
The questions are about the mentee mentorship program. So I think just trying to find the link to that and then distributing that to everybody.
Yeah.
Sarucha is just for
Oh,
everyone.
it's a great program, and if you haven't yet signed up for it, I would absolutely recommend that you sign up for it if you are looking for a mentor. And yeah, that's great. Okay, so we'll get that to you then afterwards. Absolutely. Marketing your Peace Corps service in the interview. Let's talk a little bit about interviewing, because interviewing is really, I mean, when I talk to people about getting jobs, your resume doesn't get you the job. Your resume gets you the interview. Does or doesn't get you the interview, right? At which point you'll prove yourself for the job. And so the interview is a really crucial part, right? That's where it all comes together. And this is where you're going to need to be able to make a case for why you have the skill set, or prove the skill set that you have as related to the questions that they're asking. Do a good job in responding to their questions, their behavioral questions, by giving examples, and in my interviewing, we have a different workshop that I've already facilitated. That's the recording is actually in the same place that you'll get the link for after this one. But in the interviewing, when we talk about, I talk a lot about prefacing your responses to set the context, right? So if they say, give me an example of a time you utilized your project management skills in a work environment, or whatever it is, right? You, before starting, you could say something like, sure, I have 3 years of direct experience in project management. Most recently in my Peace Corps service, where I was responsible for, and you go into that, whatever. Don't use, I have X years of experience every time, because then it sounds formulaic. But maybe another way to say it might be, my interpersonal communication skills have been refined through each of my jobs in the XYZ sector, for example, and then going into that, right? That way it lets them know that you have the skills and experience, right? And if they don't like the one example that you share, guess what? They're like, oh, well, he has 3 years of project management experience. So they're more forgiving in that way, right? As opposed to if you just go right into, when I was working in with and you go into that SCAR methodology, right? The situation talking about, and then the challenge, what was happening, the action you took, and the results. That's a great technique. And the results are really important. A lot of times people leave out the results, and that's the most important oftentimes, right? So when you're talking in your responses, this is an opportunity to really highlight your Peace Corps service. But don't have every example be Peace Corps, because guess what? It becomes very they're like, okay, what else? Do you have anything other than Peace Corps, right? So even if Peace Corps is your most formative job, or maybe your biggest job, you went maybe to Peace Corps right after undergrad, you could certainly spotlight a part-time job position that was at the university that helped you in whatever. You worked in the Office of Communications or whatever it was. So just make sure that you flip it up, but you certainly can use Peace Corps more than other ones. That's understandable, right? Definitely, what's the most most common interview question, the very first one, is something to the effect of, tell me about yourself, or tell me about your experience and why you're interested in this position. And you want to include right there in that first, your response, your Peace Corps service, right? Even if, and especially if it's your most recent experience, right? If it's from 25 years ago and, people, like me who've been out for some time, you may not be including it, but I will tell you, I still can include it in in an interview. My resume, it's hard. I put it under a different category called, service or, leadership, international service, whatever, because if I did it chronological, that just dates me and then it sets me up for ageism. So you have to be careful about those kinds of things, but you can certainly absolutely talk about your experience, in that very beginning. It's a like, wow, you were there. Oh, you were, it gets their attention, and it's good. It's also great for, many people hate the questions like, tell us about a failure of yours or challenges. Your Peace Corps service is great for that, because I have not ever met one volunteer who's never failed in Peace Corps. I mean, we all fail again and again, sometimes daily, whatever, but we learn from it, right? And the outcome of that is you learn to be, whether it's a more patient person or redesign your technique so that it's more, culturally sensitive to, or whatever, you get through those challenges, right? You learn from them and you go forth. And those are the kinds of experiences that can be really good to talk about, challenges, failures, and make sure in the end of that. And here's what I learned from it. The value of da, 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 da. And since then, I've incorporated this and have had great success in whatever. So you always kind of bring it from that, yep, I failed, to like what you learned from it. Things like that. And so your Peace Corps is great for that. Okay. Any questions at this point? We're getting toward the end actually here. We're just a couple minutes out. So if there are any questions, dump them in the chat box. We are literally, I could talk on any of these subjects and chat with you for hours, on end, just on one of them. It's so hard to decide what to talk about on these, but it's, so if you have specific questions on it, here's the time. We definitely have a few minutes, and I'm certainly willing to stay a little longer if there are additional questions. At some point, we'll shut off the recording, and I do want to, respect your time. So if you need to drop off, I completely understand. Don't worry. And yeah, that's fine too.
We have a question here from Josh. Any tips
Right.
for highlighting Peace Corps experience in interviews for jobs where the majority or all of the applicants are RPCVs? Thinking specifically of jobs posted on the RPCV career link site. What can we do to stand out?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yes, some of the jobs like on RPCV Career Link, you're going to get a lot of RPCVs that are applying for those. So you're right, you're going to have that shared Peace Corps experience. But remember, each experience is different, and how you explain your service and how you craft your application definitely varies. I mean, some people aren't going to be doing that. Let's be honest. I mean, not everybody's on this, webinar. There are, thousands of people who are back, and, there's not, that huge amount of people who are on this. So take these kinds of tips, and I would say, just, make, when you are making a case, you're not saying, I did this thing called Peace Corps. Like, yes, they're familiar with Peace Corps if they're, the fact that they're posting jobs to CareerLink means they love Peace Corps volunteers, and they specifically want to reach out and connect and hopefully get another RPCV, because you tend to be really good workers. And so that's good. So highlight your Peace Corps service and what makes you unique. If there are other things, or how you specifically meet their criteria, because not every person who's applying is going to meet their criteria of what they're looking for. So try to apply for the jobs that you're more qualified for. You don't necessarily have to have every qualification to apply. Sometimes you might stretch, because sometimes they might see you and they might like something else, and they might say, well, we could teach you this aspect. This is a technical program. So in those cases, you might want to also stress your, your quick learning ability. Just like in an interview, if they were to ask you, do you have experience in, I don't know, whatever, Wickety is the one I used to use, it's a made up one, right? And you know, to answer that, you could say, you know, I'm not as familiar with Wickety program, but I have utilized CRM and various other, and I'm a very quick learner, and I'm confident I could come up to speed in no time. So you've told them the answer, and you've, you know, showed that, you know, you're a quick learner. So oftentimes they can make those kinds of exceptions too. Now, sometimes there are absolute required, you know, it's like, this is all required, and without this, you can't even be considered. You know, if they need 3 years of experience in blah, 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 if you don't have that, you wouldn't be able to, if they say that. But if a lot of times on the amount of experience that they're looking for, they can be flexible on that too, for the right candidate, or, you know, for, you know, your, whatever you have that might be unique, that you bring to the table. Okay. I hope that answers. Let's see, are there any other ones that are coming in? Any other questions so far, Olivia? This is your last chance, folks. Whatever question you have about marketing your Peace Corps service in whatever capacity, I'm happy to answer that.
No questions so far.
Okay, that's fine. So I think what I will do is I'm going to stop the recording now, and then I can stay on for a few more minutes in case people want to. You could also, at this point, once we, you know, have a little less, you know, people as well, you could probably even unmute yourself as you're asking a question if you prefer to ask it verbally than putting it in the chat box. I'm very open to that as well. So thank you, everyone, for participating tonight, and please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. And I want to actually put my, I want to remind everyone to download the chat box, the chat conversation. If you go into the chat box, and at the bottom right, there's the little 3 dots inside the box. Click on that, and it'll give you an option to download chat. It'll be the first option usually, and that way you can look back at, you know, the websites that were, you know, shared, the emails like this, careers@peacecorpsconnect.org, and that's what I was talking about. My email there, or Jodi@peacecorpsconnect.org, and happy to chat with folks separately. And I do want to just a quick plug. We do have tomorrow at noon, we have our official podcast kickoff, the first one that we're featuring 3 RPCV entrepreneurs. It's on RPCV entrepreneurs, and we have 3 that they're amazing people. You can certainly look at the our events calendar, which, you know, is at peacecorpsconnect.org/events. And tomorrow at noon, we're going to spotlight 3 different people, and we're going to do the quote unquote live recording, right? We're going to be recording the content, and then probably tailoring it down a little bit, and eventually it'll be posted online as a, you know, for a podcast. But this is the making of that, and we'd love to have you participate, ask your questions of them. If you've ever dreamed of, you know, starting your own business, or thinking, oh, what can I do now? These are 3 people who've done it. They've done it successfully, and they're willing to share their ups and downs and recommendations. So so definitely you can apply for that. Hey, Olivia, there might be a if you have on the events calendar, if you want to copy that link, I guess you could dump it into the chat box here as well. But thank you, everyone. I am going to stop the recording right now, and then we will I'll answer some more questions if there are some. Okay, so thanks so much.
Another question here.
Yeah.
What advice would you give when you're trying to delay on deciding on an eventual job offer? For example, when you're trying to find more information about the position, and also waiting to hear back about applications you submitted.
So when you're waiting, how would you delay a job offer? Like, you have a job offer with one? Is this when you're trying to delay on deciding on an eventual job offer? Okay. For example, when you're trying to find more information about the position and also waiting to hear back about, okay. So my follow-up question for you, Clay, would be delay on deciding. So I'm taking from that you're saying they're offering you the position, and then you're trying to buy time to not tell them yay or nay because you're waiting to hear more about it. Is that right? Just
Hey, yeah,
yes or yes.
that's eventually getting to that point. Just how do you buy yourself more time? Because sometimes I guess it seems like, you know, it sneaks up like, oh wow, you got the offer, but now there's another position that you applied to, and you expect to hear back from them soon.
Right. That's a really good question, Clay. And one thing that I recommend people do is when you get an offer and, you want to obviously, be, thankful, grateful for it. Thank you so much for this offer, and this opportunity, extending this opportunity. And I'm excited about the prospect of this. I would like to request, or I would request, a few days or whatever it is, or, a few, till next, you could put out there a reasonable time, right? You wouldn't probably be able to say like more than a week, but maybe even, a week might be the limit, right? But a few days, certainly. But one thing you can do is when you get that, then you have all the more reason to reach out to the other organization who you've been in touch with, and they've said, oh, we're deciding, whatever. You can reach out to them and say, thank you again for interviewing me, last month or last week or whatever it was, for the XYZ position, as I remain extremely interested in this. However, I've been offered another opportunity. However, this is really my first choice, and I'm wondering, when you think you might be making, the final decision or moving forward, or, I'm wondering about the, projected timeline, and when you might be coming to your final decision. And that way, if you're not in the running anymore, hopefully they'd be able to, tell you and say, well, thanks so much. We actually are going with another candidate, in which case you can maybe go with the other one. But that to them gives them that signal of, oh, wow, he's wanted. Like other people want him, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Kind of can speed them up sometimes. So you definitely could do that, generally.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. But, the other thing, Clay, on that I want to say is, I would, when you, after you've interviewed and even before you've interviewed, I would continue to do research to try to talk to people who've worked there to get, the kind of pros and cons of the organization. And so you have all of that even before the offer comes, so that you don't need that much time to do those kinds of things,
Yeah.
your due diligence, after. So
Makes sense.
great.
Thanks, Jodi.
Awesome. All right. No problem. No problem. Anyone else?
We have a question here from Austin. For federal resumes, how long do you think a PC section should be?
Austin, that really depends on what your other experience is, what your Peace Corps experience was. Like, so many factors go into that, right? With federal, you have a little less space constraints because they don't have that hard, fast, or not hard, fast, but in general, the 1 page or the 2 page, limit. With federal resumes, it can go, and oftentimes does go, a lot longer, especially if you're using the resume builder, right, in USA Jobs. So, so you definitely can, you can go longer than that, so meaning you have more space. So you may put more under your Peace Corps experience, right? But that said, it kind of gets unclear if they're not unclear, but if you have, for example, if you're using bullets and you have 20 bullets under your Peace Corps service, that's kind of an eyesore, right? So you might want to then break it out into like skill sectors, like project management or, grant writing or whatever, so that you have that underneath it, so that it's a little more digestible, again, is what I talk about. I hope that makes sense. All right. Anyone else? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, Jodi, I've been listening to quite a few of the talks you've done, and I just want to say thank you so much. You bring so much information and energy, and you've helped me out immensely. So just thank you so much for all this time.
Aw. And who is this? I'm not seeing my screen right now. I apologize.
Oh, my name's John Trippy.
Oh, John, yeah, you've been in several. Oh, thank you. Thank you for participating, and thank you for your feedback. And I hope to see you in more of our future ones. Like I said, this is my first of 4 this week. So tomorrow we have the podcast one with the RPCV entrepreneurs. Thursday is going to be a really interesting one. If any of you are able to join at noon, it's featuring, it's talking about storytelling. So it really goes along with this session that I've just done. It's telling your Peace Corps service and how you tell that in different aspects of, whether it's in a grad school application or in, your resume, that kind of thing as well. And talking about the service and how in an effective way. And it's facilitated by, if any of you participated in the SIT facilitated event, this one is facilitated by Joe Lanning from the School for International Training. And he's great. And he's an RPCV himself. And he he runs these programs where he works with his students, and they come back from these service things, and he helps them kind of unpack their service, and and he's great. And that's Thursday at noon. No, I'm sorry, 11 a.m. And again, that's on our event page. If you haven't already registered, I would encourage you to do so. It should be a really good session, and yeah, I look forward to that one. And then Friday, we have Crafting Your Resume 201. So we're going to go beyond the basics that I'd covered in the initial one, and we're going to talk more about how do you decide what style of resume is right for you. So ranging from whether it's the traditional reverse chronological, or whether it's the functional resume. If people are familiar with that, it's a whole different approach, or a mixed and there's different ways. And I'm also going to talk about the master resume as a tool to help you stay organized and more efficiently be able to do your job search. So that's going to be on Friday at noon. So all of those are on our events page again. So, as always, peacecorpsconnect.org/events. And yeah, and they're all there. So.
Hi, okay. Jodi, I have a question.
Sure.
My name's Melissa. I've, in the past, I've tried getting connected to some of the events, but for some reason or another, it'll show that I'm registered, but then I don't have a link to connect. And now that I've tried registering, it's coming through, but I missed out on a lot of the events from before. And I just want to know, is there any way I can catch up or?
Absolutely. First, yes, absolutely. First of all, apologies for the difficulty that you had. There was some difficulty on our end with some of the repeat sessions that were offered twice, where the link was not working. It was pointing to the actual other sessions, so there were some issues. But now it sounds like you're all set because you are registered here and you're getting them now. You definitely need to you register on the events page. Then we send you the confirmation email that has the not secret, but the Zoom, because we have to be private about it because of, Zoom
absolutely,
and all kinds of things.
absolutely. Yeah. So I was just happy that I was able to connect today.
But you can watch any of the old ones though on our events page. The Global Reentry playlist, which I will include in the email that's going to go out to all participants from this. It will go out within 2 days. And it will have the link to that, but it's basically, I think you can actually get there if you go to the Global Reentry page. When you go into peacecorpsconnect.org, just click under Global Reentry, and when you get there, look at like careers, and you're going to see they'll have a link to our playlist on YouTube. The global list, I think you can just even Google it, Global Reentry playlist YouTube, NPCA, whatever, and you will get to it. So. Yeah, so you have all of them. There's all kinds of things there.
Okay. I do have another question. There's been several positions that have been available through different sites, and I just wanted to get a second set of eyes in reviewing my resume. So this is like a mid-level position, and I know from experience with Peace Corps and my former, because I worked with human service field for many years as a social worker. And so I just wanted to get someone, if you can like review my resume to be just to find out if it's okay.
Sure. I mean, I'd be happy to take a look at a resume. I'm not able to, unfortunately, do like, for every resume, for different jobs, whatever, multiple jobs, but I can certainly take a look at it and tell you if you're, in the right direction, and maybe some, share some tips, and I can share a sample resume that might help you too.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So just email me, okay?
Okay, will do. And my name is Melissa Edwards.
Yes. Thank you, Melissa. And that's great. All right. Sounds good. All right. So unless there are any other questions right now, I think I will probably sign off and allow you all to get back to your evenings as well. We really, again, appreciate you coming and spending time with us. And please let us know if we can help in any way, okay? We're here to help, and please spread the word to other RPCVs too. We really want to make sure that everyone has access to the webinars that we're doing, and that we can help as many people as possible. Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Olivia, for your help.
Of course. Thank you, Jodi.
All right. Bye-bye now.